be joined by Pastor Brian Davies today for our conversation about isolation and how we can overcome the challenges of isolation through the community that we find in the church. We're so glad you're with us. If you're joining us today, we hope that you will, one, share this link with someone you know that might be interested or could benefit from listening to it. We want to invite as many people as possible into our conversation because we know that as the community of the church, we're stronger when we are together in community. Secondly, if you're listening to us, I sure hope that you will introduce yourself in the comments. If you have questions on anything that we're talking about today or things that you may have been wrestling with over time, feel free to leave those questions in the chat as well. We'll work to get through as many of those as we can during our conversation with Brian. And if we don't get through all of them, I'm sure that Brian will be more than happy to come in later and answer your questions and keep the conversation going after the fact. So again, we're glad you're joining us for our conversation today about overcoming isolation through community. Hi, Brian.
Hey, good afternoon, Elizabeth.
We've gotten
a chance to talk a few times on this journey, and it always is a positive experience for me.
It's a fun experience, and it's a topic that we need to be reminded of the fact. I was at church yesterday talking with a few people, and the topic of community came up, and it led down a path of even just a brief conversation with someone that you may not have seen in a while or that you're used to seeing often, where they reach out like, hey, how are you? It makes a difference. We're wired for this. And so I'm so glad that you're with us today to talk us through it, the challenges that we're seeing to community today and some of the ways that you've identified in your new book about how we can build that community to help overcome isolation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say thanks to everyone who's tuning in and for making this a part of your day. Happy Monday. And also want to acknowledge today is Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Today's a day for our country to reflect and look back at I would argue, one of the greatest Americans who ever lived. His legacy is huge and still being realized. Thanks be to God for him. And I think one of the highlights of his message was a vision to bring people together. And he really did a great job advancing that story. And we celebrate that today. And so many others are continuing his work. And this book is all about, I think, the vision he had to bring people together. And that's what I'm hoping to do with the book. And thanks be to God for the opportunity to share it with you all today.
Well, we're excited about this, and it's a small book, but it packs a powerful punch. And we'll give you more details on that later. But for now, we want to talk about the heart of the topic. As we start to think about things, it's not hard, especially in this year where we've had pandemic the last year. Everything has been different. We've seen communities relegated from in-person to virtual to Zooms, texts, and it's not the same as being in person. But even before that, there have always been challenges to community. What are some of the threats that exist to building a good, strong community?
Yeah. If there was ever a time to be talking about the importance of community, it's now. And we've realized that, haven't we, over the last 10 months. It's been an incredibly challenging 10 months. And I would argue one of the biggest challenges over the last 9 or 10 months has been the separation that we felt. And I think that totally speaks to the idea that we were meant to be physically together. We were meant to occupy the same spaces. We were meant to hug and touch and hang and visit. And around the dinner table moments have been replaced by porch and backyard visits. Sometimes church services replaced by parking lot conversations and Zoom meetings. And, I think that all speaks to, hey, we've been creative because we've had to be. But how great will it be, won't it, everybody, when we can be together and feel great about it, because that's the way it was designed to be. We've experienced it significantly over the last 10 months or so. But even before the last 10 months, wouldn't you agree, Elizabeth, that isolation, loneliness, and division were on the rise? That's why this book was written, even well before COVID-19. We even knew what that meant because Concordia Publishing House and others recognized, hey, we got to talk about this. And I saw it too in my own personal ministry. I saw notions and feelings of isolation and loneliness significantly increasing. And this is not just something we're feeling, research is indicating it. Cigna Health Insurance, major healthcare provider, did a exhaustive study about feelings of loneliness and isolation. And I thought this was significant and it's worth sharing. They identified that those who are the most digitally connected are ironically feeling the most lonely. And the folks that you would think would feel the most lonely, our senior citizens, actually report those feelings the least. It's because, I would argue, our seniors can teach us a lot about authentic relationships and the importance of face-to-face and in-person moments. So as I surveyed the landscape, I saw, and I think Concordia Publishing House did as well, a landscape that saw people feeling increasing senses of isolation and loneliness. Thanks be to God. God speaks to it in his word, and God's Bible, his word, is going to really help us get our handle on what his vision for his church truly is.
Okay, so we have a question from Katie in Maryland. Hi, Katie. Glad that you could join us today. And she's got a big question that I think covers a lot of things that you talk about and you address, where she says, living in a community in turmoil is challenging. I think we can argue that we have a lot of turmoil in the world today. It's easier to retreat to our like-minded tribes, but that only increases divisions with communities and isolation. How can we get outside of our comfort zones to bridge that divide, especially when hearts may be hardened or overwhelmed, so that our communities can heal and grow stronger?
Katie, I want to affirm you for that question, and you totally nailed it. Katie nailed the idea that people are feeling these senses of loneliness and isolation, and they are retreating to tribes. We talk about that in the book. Because people have felt a need for community, they have found it in like-minded communities. And we talk about that directly in the book, that although that kind of feels like it's building community, the reality is it's building community against another. Like, we are united in our dislike for this group, or we are united in our feelings towards this one thing, and we're against this one thing. I would call that almost a false sense of community, because as Katie realizes, the most beautiful sense of community is when you can find it with those with whom you even disagree. And that's really God's vision for his church, that God's vision for his church would be that folks, even coming from varying different backgrounds, experiences, education levels, personal spiritual experience, race, ethnicity, everything, might find a sense of identity and belonging in his church. So Katie's question, to directly address it, what does it look like to bridge the divide? I think, Katie, the fact that you're asking the question is a great first step. Jesus says in John chapter 6, it's one of my favorite quotes of Jesus, "Those who come to me, I will never drive away." That is to say, if you, Katie, seek out authentic community with someone else, you may hit some speed bumps along the way, but it's never as though God up in heaven is going to look down at you and say, "No, I don't want you to find community, and I'm not going to help you do that." The beauty is when we take steps of faith, seeking to build community, I believe that the Lord meets us in those moments. So I want to encourage Katie and really all of folks who are tuning in today to take a first step. Read a book. I got a good one to suggest, but then it's going to encourage you to find people with whom, that person might think differently, but that is someone for whom Christ died, and I'm going to hear them out. I'm going to ask good questions. I'm going to sit and listen and ask and learn, and we're going to see God meet us in those moments.
In your book, you have a quote, and I don't have it directly in front of me, but you do say, akin to what you've just been saying, we need to spend more time listening and thinking and hearing rather than speaking and shouting and yelling.
That's right. As you reflect, Elizabeth, on the ministry of Jesus Christ, it's amazing, isn't it? How much he asks questions. right? As he goes community to community, one of his biggest and most successful strategies is not to come in and yell and proclaim. And he, of course, does some proclaiming from time to time. But one of his biggest and best and most successful strategies is sitting and listening and asking questions. And the irony about Jesus asking a question, right? He knows the answer. So if Jesus, who knows all the answers, asks questions, we probably ought to employ a little more question asking ourselves.
I think if he's okay with asking questions to help us go through the process,
that's right.
We can attempt to be vulnerable and let ourselves listen and ask questions we might actually learn something.
That's right.
It or not. We may think we know everything, but we may actually learn something if we quiet ourselves and listen to another person.
So I think, bottom line, Elizabeth, we need more people like Katie from Maryland running around, seeking to do what she's saying, observing the problem, and seeking to build community, because I think God will meet his people in those moments.
So what are the ways, and I don't disagree that we need more people like Katie from Maryland, and I hope that others, if they have questions, they'll drop them in the chat so that we can address them while we're talking. What are some of the other ways that we see that we've been wired for community? I mean, you started to allude to it a little bit, but God created us to be in community. Jesus lived that out in his life. Where can we see that that's how we were really wired?
Yeah, I would invite everyone who's tuning in now and who's going to tune in later just to think for themselves for a second of a moment in the last 6 months, and maybe you're going to have to think back before then because of COVID, but just a moment when you were gathered in a group and there was just tons of laughter and joy. And if you look at the clock, you were together for like 4 hours, but it felt like 30 minutes. That's a sweet spot. And it's a sweet spot of being in community. I think when we live out those moments, something within us screams, holy cow, I needed this. I needed this. And we've really needed it, haven't we, over the last 10 months or so? But we're going to get back to it, thanks be to God. But I think those moments to me cry out and scream out, this is the way it's supposed to be. There's so much joy and laughter when different people from different backgrounds come together and enjoy being in life and community together. I think of moments like a theater production coming together to put together something, and they started really with nobody understanding what was going on, and then over time built towards this product of the play, and it just everybody does their part. I think of a sports team, like, say, the Buffalo Bills. Yeah, see, I'm a New York native. Let's talk about the Buffalo Bills. A great team coming together, different people, everybody doing their part. I think the church is the same way. When the church is functioning at its best, it's different people with different backgrounds, everybody embracing how God uniquely has called them. All those pieces come together, and then the mission of God moves. I think it's a beautiful moment.
It really is when we come together, and we need to be attuned to this. And I think it can be easy for us to get lost in our own, all of our to-do lists, the things that we have going on, and miss those opportunities where we can come together. How can we be alert for these opportunities and kind of stop thinking inside ourselves and look out?
Great question, Elizabeth. And I've been thinking about this recently in terms of how many people are monetizing our division, right? How many businesses, media companies, and the like do well because they can actually divide us. So I think it does start with a sense of awareness that what I'm consuming is influencing me to think negatively about another human being because of how they think politically or a decision they're making or how they think about COVID. I think we've really got to be on the lookout for that. I've been on the lookout for it. We're in a culture right now where it seems like you're either in this camp or this camp. and people, entities are making money putting us in one camp or the other. God invites us into a family where there are no camps. And so if you find yourself thinking negative thoughts about somebody because of how they think politically or decisions they're making or how they think about something, I would invite us to put the pause button on that for just a second and think, if Jesus walked in the room when I was saying that or thinking that, and Jesus said, why are you thinking that about that person? Could you look at Jesus with a straight face and say, well, it's because, Jesus, they're in the other political party. I don't think Jesus would take too kindly to that,
No.
right?
I think we would be looked at with anger really
I
quick.
think so. So I think we need to be aware of all the ways in which it is becoming increasingly normal to be divided. That scares me, because it's Jesus himself who says, holy cow, I want you to be one, and I want you to experience unity. So this is really the work of the evil one, seeking to divide.
So taking this a step further, Deb Burma asked the question. Hi, Deb.
Deb, thank you.
Where she says we need these sweet spots in our community. So not only how can we recognize our own challenges to that, but how can we encourage these in tangible ways in our own communities?
Awesome example. So let's talk about it in two specific ways. So the first thing I would do would be for Deb, on your own, find a way to build a bridge with someone that you otherwise would not be in community with. So maybe you're in a neighborhood or a subdivision where the folks don't really actually connect very much. That could be. Or maybe there's just a group in your workplace that, certain groups within the organization kind of hang over here and someone else hangs over here. I would encourage first, like someone like Deb, to say, all right, I'm actually going to do the first work of building a bridge with somebody else. And then the second thing I would do would be to tell a story about it. As you interact with folks, tell stories. As you interact with folks in person or as you interact with folks on social media, tell stories about how you built a bridge across kind of a cultural dividing line and how you benefited from it. How did it move you and bless you? I think if we fill the social media airwaves and the conversations with a heck of a lot less of the negative thoughts about what the other person is doing or how they're thinking, and instead fill it with, hey, I actually talked to my neighbor, 3 doors down for the first time and found that we have a different background. But what was cool is we agreed on X, Y, and Z and found ways to find community in that way. I think you can live it, Deb, and share it.
So we had another question come in, and this is from Debbie. And Debbie says hello. But so it's been difficult with COVID, and she's feeling down and feeling sad. So how can she work to turn these feelings around?
Yeah. So, great question, Deb, and God bless you. It's so good to have you, Deb, in this forum. So I think the first thing you got to do is, like they say, it's a cliche, but sometimes cliches are true. The first thing I do is recognize the problem. First thing I do is recognize, hey, I'm not feeling that great today. In those moments, here's what I've encouraged our faith family to do. I've encouraged our faith family to do a two-step dance: reach up and reach out. The reach up is reaching out to God and saying, hey, God, I'm kind of having a rough day. It's okay to say that to God, isn't it, Elizabeth?
Yes.
Midday, and say, hey, God, you probably know this, but I'm kind of having a rough day. I'm kind of not feeling that great today. I think
it speaks to the laments in the Psalms, right?
That's right. Look at the book of Psalms that say, hey, God, where are you in the midst of this? I think the Bible teaches us to say that to God. So I think the first move would be to reach up to God and say, hey, God, I'm kind of having a rough day. I know you see it, but I just want to let you know I'm feeling it too. All right. Reach up. And then secondly, to reach out. Debbie's a really social person. I know Debbie from social media. Debbie's tuning into our church's live stream. She's awesome. She's a community builder, and she uses technology in an awesome way to build up. And I think sometimes we've made social media and technology the enemy. It's not, it's just a means. And I'm convinced that social media and technology can actually, in some cases, build community, like a group thread among friends or family. How awesome it is to use that technology. And I know Debbie does it too, to actually connect and build people together. So I would encourage Debbie, keep doing what you're doing in those rough moments. Keep reaching out and reaching up.
So Lois Stewart says hi. Hi, Lois.
Hey, Lois. Thanks for joining us.
I think Lois will keep an eye on you up there in the northern Illinois
She's
area.
doing a great job.
So we have another comment over here from Sherry, who says, some of this has been happening to her, and she's felt that she was dispensable and is looking to God, and she just says, thank you. So I don't know if you have any thoughts for Sherry.
I do. I love life with God. And we get into this in the book a little bit because I'm convinced the world does a great job of beating us up. The world does a great job of convincing us that we fall short in this way or that way. Someone else is doing it better. We talk about in the book, comparison is the thief of joy. Bottom line, the world does a great job of giving us coal. Okay. What I love about life with God is that you are given a sense of identity and belonging with God. First Peter puts it this way, an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade. We have life with God. No one can take that away. And we are then brought into community and family. Get this, where every single person is valued and significant. And no one's contributions in God's eyes are more important than another's. Instead, some of us are kidneys, some of us are spleens, some of us are pinky toes, some of us are elbows. But every single person is valued. And so I'm so glad, I think it was Cheryl that asked that question, because the world does do a great job of convincing us we're not that valuable. We're dispensable. But in God's family, you are not. You are part of the body of Christ, and each one of you is a part of it.
How can there are countless stories throughout the Bible and throughout the history of the church that can bring us comfort in knowing that we are part of the family of God, and that can't be taken away. Tell us some of those ways that God has worked through his people to show us just that.
Oh man, Elizabeth, I love talking about that because I loved as I got this project, and I was even doing it before, but thinking through how the notion of community is woven throughout the Bible. And if you think about it, from the time of Genesis, where God says, hey, it's not good for people to be alone. You're not meant to be alone. You're meant to be in community, Adam and Eve, to the placing folks in the Old Testament in tribes. God didn't have to do that. There could have been one big tribe. Instead, God said, hey, I'm going to put you into families so you feel a sense of kinship and identity within that tribe. That kind of carried throughout the Old Testament. Then we get the New Testament, where Jesus actually calls people to be disciples with him. And just for a second, think about that. The mission of Jesus could have been accomplished without disciples, right? He could have lived perfectly, died, and rose again without the disciples. But instead, he says, I'm gonna teach people about community. You're going to follow me. You're going to walk with me. This is the best way to live life with God, is actually in community. When he sends the disciples out, he actually sends them 2 by 2. And we talk about this in the book, but it sure could have been a lot more, quote unquote, efficient if he sent them out 1 by 1. Could have covered maybe theoretically twice as much ground. But instead, God says, no, I want you to experience the idea of being with another on the journey of discovering God's calling for you. So we live it there. And then, of course, in Revelation, we get a vision of the community to come. This is God's vision for his people, to be in community.
So we just had Deb is chiming in. So she's appreciating what you just said with woven throughout the Bible. So Christy says that they're doing online Bible studies and daily devotions with in-person worship. What else can we do?
Yeah, it's a really great question. That's the question our church, Lord of Glory in Grayslake, has been asking. And we have found significant richness in home visits from porches and from driveways. And let me just talk briefly about that. When we realized that we were not going to be able to be in person for Palm Sunday, and I don't know about you, Elizabeth, and for listeners, but on Palm Sunday, I need my palm. It can't be Palm Sunday if I can't have my palm waving. So we said we have to get a palm to every household. And we had a great staff. Shout out to our office staff for dividing our church up and soliciting folks to make visits. But we just delivered on porches safely palms so people could embrace that. So I think in the midst of an era, temporary, of in-person worship, the more that you can deliver to folks a touch point from a church family, it's huge. We did it for our seniors at Christmas time. One of my favorite moments every December is that we get our seniors group. It's sometimes usually between 35 and 50 seniors into our church lobby for a luncheon in December. We realized in December 2020 it probably wasn't going to be the wisest idea for us to do that in person. So we made porch visits to all of our seniors. I thought it was a beautiful way for us to be the church and to show love, that they are valued, they're part of our church family. Even though they have to be kind of physically distant for a few more months, let's remind all of our folks that they're still a part of God's family and they are indispensable, to use Cheryl's language above.
Let's step back just a touch from those actual things that we can do as a church community to stay in contact. But we've talked about how God showed that community matters and he wired us for that. Take us to why it's important for the church to live that out today.
Oh, for so many reasons, right? Why is it important for the church? Number one, because that's what God has called us to do. He says, hey, I love you guys, and here's how I want you to live. Number two, it's incredibly, beautifully countercultural. So if you want to be the best, maybe quote unquote evangelist right now, I think tell the story of your church making a difference by being a community that accepts people regardless of how they think about a certain issue, because that is a stream in the desert of a very dry and lonely culture. The church might be one of the last entities that should live without that sense of cultural division. The world is putting up boundaries between everybody, right? You camp out on this tribe or that tribe, how you feel about this issue or that issue, where you lean politically here or there. The church might be one of the last places that says, hey, regardless of how you think politically, regardless of your age, your educational experience, you find identity and belonging here. It's important that the church does that. Why? Because the Lord Jesus Christ made every single person have intrinsic value. If that person is valuable enough to God that he would lay down his life for them, even if they think differently about COVID or think differently politically about me, they still have value. And it seems silly that we even have to say that, but we do, don't we, Elizabeth? Because we're in a world that says you only have value if you agree with me.
I think it's worth saying again because it is such a critical point, and it's one that I believe that if we could all just remember that, it would transform how we interact with everyone else. So
Correct.
recap that again for us so that we don't miss this point.
Thanks so much for letting me do that, because I was going to say, man, I almost want to say that again. Let's just level set. We are in a world that is teaching us to divide each other, to put us in camps. People are making boatloads of money running media entities, separating us and dividing us. Okay, we live in a world that is inviting us to think negatively about other human beings because of how they think or act or do certain things, or what they believe about something. We need to be totally on the lookout that is the work of the evil one, seeking to steal and kill and destroy and divide. Jesus Christ says, you have value, you have life with me, regardless of your personal background, your religious experience. your personal history, your political beliefs. You are equally invited into a space at God's table in God's family for eternity, regardless of how you think about a certain issue.
And that should bring immense comfort to everyone, knowing that there's nothing that this world can throw at us.
That's right.
That one will remove that. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what other people think, because we know that God loves us and cherishes us.
Right. So, Elizabeth, we actually talked about this on a Sunday, and I taught our church to say a statement in their head. And the statement I taught our church to say, and I'm probably going to not say it perfectly now, but it was something like, wow, that's a really interesting perspective. I don't see it that way, but I'm still glad we're a part of a family together. And people told me that they found themselves saying that to their spouse, during the week when they disagreed about something. They'd say, that's interesting that you would say that. I really don't see it that way, but I'm glad we're a part of a family together. Man, if the church could live that out, how beautiful it would be.
Oh, absolutely. My mother at one point was a member of the city council in our hometown, and people would come up to the microphone and would spew whatever they felt like they had the right to say, no matter how angry it was. And she quickly learned to think to herself and then to say, keeping her composure, she does it better than anybody I know, thank you for your opinion. We appreciate you sharing.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And you kind of have to stop that, because if you let all of that entice you into an argument, we're off the mark, and we are moving away from community when we should actually be working to bridge and build community with each other.
Yeah, God bless your mom for that. And I think it's a great example, because I know your mom walks with the Lord, Elizabeth. That's a great example of a Christian living out their vocation, using, the principles that they've been taught as a follower of God to make a difference in their community. And boy, what a great opportunity to, like somebody really smart told me, it's a great time to be the church right now. Okay.
I wonder who that was.
Dale Meyer, retired Concordia Seminary president, is going around the country right now virtually saying it's a great time to be the church, because if we as a church could live like this and model, hey, culture, there's a different way to view people who have differences. What a stream in the desert that would be.
Oh, it would be welcome for so many people. And I think we have to recognize that as we do that, it may not always be met with open arms. Yep. But we can't give up. We're not called to let it be. We're called to continue to live that life that God has called us to, and keep going.
That's right. Galatians 6:9 is one of my favorite Bible verses. It says, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we'll reap a harvest if we don't give up. Which means to me, keep going, keep doing, keep living right, even when it seems like culture is going in the exact opposite direction, because we will reap a harvest if we don't give up.
So if someone listening, or someone that listens to this in the future, is craving this community and isn't currently connected,
yep,
it can be intimidating if you've not been a part of a church community. It can be really intimidating to take the first step. What are some ways that they can start to get connected?
Thanks for asking that question, Elizabeth. I went back and listened to the podcast we did a little while back, and I'm really glad I'm getting an opportunity to kind of address this again, because I want to change my answer from the podcast.
Really?
Here's my thought. The first thing I did at the podcast, when you asked kind of a similar question, was I pointed people to the church. And I think for folks not connected to a church, if you're seeking to find community, sometimes it can take a little while as a stranger going into a church. So I actually want to say, hey, if you are tuning in right now and you're feeling sense of isolation and disconnected and you're seeking to build community, I believe a church is in your future, but my first step would be reach out to a friend that you know who is a Christian and let them know, hey, I got something stirring in my heart towards community and unity, and I see everything that's happening in the world, and I kind of want it to be a little different. And you're a Christian. Tell me about that. I think it's going to be a heck of a lot easier for people to find community as a Christian with someone with whom they already know and have a relationship with. So I want to encourage you, kind of going back to what I said before, the reach up and the reach out. Find a Christian that you trust, someone with whom, hey, maybe you've talked about a bunch of things, but never really talked about faith with, and ask them to talk about their faith journey and share where you're at. Do some sitting and listening and asking questions, and pray that God would meet you in that moment to build community with them. Second thing I would encourage people to do would be to find a place to serve with Christians. As I survey the landscape of Christians who are living out community, the ones who are doing it the best are the ones who are actually serving. And folks who feel like, hey, some of my best friends are at the church and are fellow Christians, it's because they're serving in a church and they're seeing the richness of being shoulder to shoulder or face to face and making a difference. And then the third thing is what I said in the podcast is the first thing, the importance of worship. Worship is huge because worship stops the noise. It stops the chaos. It stops the uncertainty. It stops all the 10,000 messages that come at us every day that tell us the world's in chaos. Just look at the media. They're going to tell you so many messages. In worship, you're reminded of a couple things. Number one, you're reminded, hey, God is still on his throne. Number two, that I have a space at the table. And number three, these folks that I'm rubbing shoulders with, whether they're wise senior citizens or 3-year-olds tossing Cheerios all over the pew, equally were valued in God's family. And I think there's a lot of value to regularly making that a part of your week. There's a reason that God invites us to do that once a week, because we need it.
So some of the trends that we're seeing and some of the projections of trends are that after this pandemic we're looking at it in the rearview mirror, things are shifting, and some of the trends are projecting that people that had been coming to church on a regular, semi-regular basis and who have not been during the pandemic time may not be compelled to come back. And that's scary when you think about the benefits that we find from being a community in the church. Can you underscore what you were just saying about the benefits that we receive from coming together in worship, and why people who might be thinking about not coming back, who might be thinking, oh, I can just watch online, I can get that peace, I can get that need filled in other ways, why they really should strongly consider coming back in person to worship?
Yeah. Good question, Elizabeth. And I think we're going to have to really be on the lookout for that. Because I think what we're going to see happen as we come out of COVID is that there's going to be a slow but pretty pervasive move that everything can be done virtually, that face-to-face contact is not needed. Let me just give you one quick example. We had to deliver some payment for something at our local park district. Because of COVID, they installed an outside drop box where you can just drop that form and your payment into the safe and secure drop box. Pre-COVID, what did we used to have to do, Elizabeth, do you think? You'd have to go inside and you talk to another human being. And I remember those moments. In fact, we did it pre-COVID, like a few months before COVID. You walked in, hey, they're building a new playground. Tell me about it. And then they'd ask you about, maybe ask me about how my kids are doing. I'd ask them, some, human discourse that now is going to be replaced by a Dropbox exchange. I kind of mourn that, don't you?
I do, and as an introvert, I'm not opposed to dropping something in Dropbox, but I have noticed over the last however many months, there have been times where I have craved going to church or anywhere, hugging those people that you normally see and talk to, and those moments of that personal connection that we get when we're face to face.
That's right. So I guess bottom line, we're going to see a move towards this, and I think we need to be aware of it. And I think we're going to want to fight the urge to say, let's just do church like that too. Because recognize that while the live stream of a worship service is going to meet some needs for some folks, if it keeps folks who are feeling under the weather, gives them a chance to hear God's word safely in their home while they're battling, a flu at home or something, I think that's a great accommodation. But the idea that like a virtual or digital thing could permanently replace the way God designs it to be, where you're together physically, hearing the same thing, singing the same hymns, a part of the same family. I just think about the value that my own children have from seeing, I'm going to say, dozens of senior citizens every single week. You cannot put a price on that for me, because otherwise they're in school with their peers and teacher, they're in sports with their peers and coach, they're hanging with their friends, and they like to hang with their dad because they're still young, Elizabeth. They still love to hang with their mom and me. But otherwise, without church, I don't think they'd have a lot of conversations with senior citizens. But because they're at church, that's very normal for them, and that's the way it should be. And I think that's just one gap that church kind of overcomes, if you will, the age gap. But there's a lot of other gaps too. And I think what a treasure the church will be going forward, to be a place where you are valued and accepted, regardless of how you think about something, regardless of your age, regardless of your personal background, regardless of all those ways in which we are being divided. Church is here, and it's meant to be experienced in person.
Church is such a great place for those intergenerational relationships to develop, and it's good for all ages. For mothers, I remember my kids are old enough now where I'm out of the era of being used as a jungle gym throughout the entire church service. But I remember always being grateful for the senior citizens who were behind me, having the chance to say, "You got it, Mom. You got it."
Yeah,
you got it.
That's right.
And just for my kids to get to know different people, and I think it behooves us to, when we do go to church, yes, we might be stuck in our ways and we always sit in the same pew and talk to the same people, but let's look across the sanctuary. Let's stop in the narthex afterwards and when the day comes that we can have cups of coffee again.
Yes.
And talk to someone that we haven't had a chance to talk to before, so that we strengthen that community internally so that we're stronger when we go out.
That's right. So Elizabeth, that's a great point. Thanks for bringing that up about how to practice that at church. Here's what I've personally done, and it's worked for me, and here's what I've encouraged my church leadership to do. There are people that fill my bucket in my church family, right? There's people that love me for who I am. If I quit being a pastor, they wouldn't stop loving me at all, because they love me for who I am. All right. So I love seeing those people in church. They're like, quote unquote, my friends. All right. I love seeing them. There's also value to finding people in the church lobby or in the back of the sanctuary that no one's really talking to. So what my personal practice is, and what I've encouraged our elders to do and church leaders and staff to do, for every one of those moments where you go to your safe person, like the person that fills your bucket, and it's just like so good to be with them and to hug them, for every one of those, go find someone else you've never talked to, right? And say, hey, I don't think we've really rubbed shoulders yet, and I don't think we've really met yet. Tell me again your name? Tell me what this is like for you to be here today, or ask some open-ended question, because I think we do need that personal connection that fills our bucket, but we also got to find those folks that haven't really found connection and community yet, and help them experience that at church.
It's great that you're starting that culture at the top, because it matters. Behavior in any organization, from the leadership on down, it definitely matters. And I think if your culture to greet people and smile at people and say hello when you pass them at church, you're going to do the same thing out in the world. And who knows where the Spirit may lead for you to start a connection and get to know someone else.
Yeah, I think about, Elizabeth, what you said about being a young mom. and the person
Back in the
saying,
day.
back in the day, saying, hey, you're going to get through it, honey, or what did you say?
You got this, Mom.
You got this, Mom. Yeah. Like how many other times, like maybe you were at the grocery store and got a dirty look or something, So I think it's okay for the church to really practice positive community and encouraging words and affirmations, and encouragements, because we need it. And then if we practice it kind of in the safe way at church, number one, it will overcome the dirty looks at the grocery store. And then I think I'm convinced we'll build up, the way we live at church ought to be the way we live at the grocery store, ought to be the way we live in all of our world. So it's like, let's practice it here, then go and live it.
Well, and the church should be different. You should walk in, it should be palpably different than what you get out in the world, because God has wired it to be special. So as we start to wrap up a little bit, give us your elevator speech about your fantastic book that I've got upside down and backwards, and tell us how groups might be able to use this together to help go deeper into this topic that we've been talking about.
Super. First thing, huge shout out to the family at Concordia Publishing House. I think you all know, Elizabeth, how thankful I am to all of you and your hard work. You helped me a whole bunch. I love that we get a chance to share this story of this book with this world, because it is the perfect time for this topic to be addressed. If you're looking around and seeing the way things are and saying to yourself, this is not the way it's supposed to be, this book is going to help you, number one, identify ways in which, that's not right. That's crazy. We shouldn't be thinking like that. But rather than just merely present the problem, it's going to point to a few things. It's going to point, number one, to the idea that each one of us, and this is why I was super passionate about writing this book, that each one of us has identity and belonging with God. That God, regardless of our background, our personal history, religious background, or lack thereof, God makes a place and a space at the table for you. Thanks be to God for that. He's made a place in the space at the table for me. So first thing, you're invited into life with God. And then secondly, life with God means life with a church family. And it can be so beautiful to practice community together. So the book kind of takes through the journey of, hey, the challenge, we're brought into life with God, and then how best do we put that into practice as the church? I love the idea, and I know groups are already doing this, or planning to do it, because tomorrow's release day, January 19th. They're planning to use this in small group Bible studies. I think it's the perfect time to use this as a small group Bible study. If you are in a small group, if you are in a church that has small groups, I want to encourage you to share this resource, because it speaks directly to what we're seeing in culture right now, and it will be good conversation fodder for people to go through this book. Every chapter ends with discussion questions. The back of the book has printed kind of answers or things to be thinking about to those questions. So I think it's super user friendly as a group to go through. And I commend this book to anyone who wants a richer sense for life with God and life in community.
So I've dropped a link to the book, to the landing page for the book, in the chat, in the comments there. And you can click that link and go and you can download a free excerpt. You can also take it to the page to purchase the book. It's a wonderfully insightful, quick read, because we do have attention spans of goldfish. But Brian, you keep our attention span going throughout this book, and you pack it full with so many good insights that we really need to take to heart about what it means to live in community and the benefits that that brings. Brian, as we get ready to wrap up, what final words of encouragement do you have for our viewers today?
I would just echo what your dad taught me, which is it's a great time to be the church. And in all seriousness, I think it's easy to kind of be discouraged right now, both looking around. And I think also it's a little easy to be discouraged because it feels like church isn't what it once was, or, there's some struggles there. But it's a great time to be the church, because once again, God and his church offers a stream in the desert, offers hope and peace, authentic community, even in the midst of a world that's teaching us to divide.
We appreciate that very much. Listeners, we're so glad that you could join us today. If you want to learn more about Pastor Brian and the book that he wrote, head to cph.org/community. Again, that link is in the comments. And we'd encourage you to share this conversation, click the link and share it on your social channels to bring a little bit of light out into what we're seeing out there in the world and to bring other people into this conversation. I'm putting Brian on the spot, but I trust that he will jump back in later if there are any new questions or comments, and he will engage and answer
Absolutely.
those to help continue that conversation. So again, as Brian mentioned, the book releases tomorrow. You can get it at cph.org. Really encourage you to check it out. Pastor Brian, thank you so much for being with us today.
Elizabeth, thanks to you for having this great conversation. And thanks to everyone who tuned in and put comments and asked great questions. We practiced a little community right here.
We absolutely did. And community is great. And every time you can get it, we can't be in person. Being able to have these conversations over technology is a good substitute, but it's not the same as gathering together and worship each other. Thanks, everyone. Till next time.